committed this year to try and get language sampling and analysis on everyone's mind. So let's see if I can achieve that. Not sure. We'll see. Okay. So from transcript to insights, an introduction. So a quick disclaimer is some of you will know I do have a financial interest in SALT in that they give some of the proceeds of just the Australian and New Zealand sales to me. It goes into a research account that will help me create further databases because it's a very time-intensive process, as you will realize. So briefly, we'll talk about why language sample analysis, but I'm assuming if you're here, then you probably know the answer. Then what is SALT? But I'm going to compare it to some other frequently and freely available tools that are out there at the moment. Then we'll talk about choosing the sampling context, but really I want to spend a bit of time giving you a case study to demonstrate how you actually enter code and analyze a story retail sample. It will be an Australian/New Zealand sample, but hopefully that will be useful to you. And as I said, please put your questions or comments in the chat box, and these won't be recorded. So, why language sample analysis? At the end of the day, of course, it depends on your clinical question. What is the information that you want to get from your language sample or your language sample analysis? Because there's, it is a time or can be a time-intensive process, and we don't want to waste time, just like we don't want to waste time administering standardized tests, for example. So we may want to just look at word and sentence level, look at a child's grammatical abilities or the types of words that they use. We may want to look at the discourse level. So that's at the overall level of a child's narrative, for example. And there's conversation, narration, expository, persuasion. There's a whole long list of different discourse types. And we may want to do it to set goals for intervention. Having standardized scores on a self or a TILS is one thing, but how can we then get some really functionally relevant goals for that particular child? It will really assist us in monitoring progress over time, of course. We can't redo standardized tests. We can do observations, of course, but language sample analysis is a really valid way of tracking a child's progress over time. And then another reason could be that you want to compare the results to, I'm going to call them typical peers, but peers who do not have either a diagnosed language disorder or difficulty or a neurodevelopmental condition. And you may want to do that to confirm, refute, or complement your standardized test results. And then finally, of course, you may want to create a performance report for reporting back to family, teachers, and other professionals. So there are lots of reasons why you may want to do language sample analysis. So why does it feel so time-consuming? There's been lots of research out there that sort of tells us what we already know. It's transcription. A lot of people will take language samples, but then transcribing is this big hurdle. But we have automated speech recognition. This is very exciting. Sometimes it's hard to do your utterance segmentation. What is actually an utterance? How long is it? Where do I cut it? Because it really affects the child's mean length of utterance. And then you've got to identify bound morphemes or check them, although we do have computer programs for that as well. You need to identify like repetitions, unfinished utterances, reformulations. So look at mazing behavior, we call it. You may want to identify pauses. Then you may want to identify errors at word and sentence level or not, but we do know it's a sensitive indicator of language difficulties. And then, of course, there's the whole analysis and interpretation. And then the combination may feel, it's just too much work. So let's move straight into transcription. What is already out there that we could use straight away? Have I been muted all that time? Can someone nod? Oh, perfect. You can still hear me and you've been able to hear me? Oh, perfect. Okay, I just got a notification from Zoom. Let's keep going. All right, so transcription. now there is ASR. There are lots of different options available, and they're coming onto the market quite rapidly. So the first one that is you can often use within your Office suite of services is Azure. And if you have like an enterprise one, then it could even be quite a secure one. The problem there is that it often actually doesn't, or it actually doesn't transcribe the child's reformulations, and often it actually corrects the child's grammar and articulation. So that's where it's not always the most useful tool to use. There is Otter AI, and I know that my colleagues in New Zealand have used that very successfully to analyze short story retell samples, and you can train the model, but that's based on big data sets. There's also Rev AI, and you may want to check that out. Now, I know that for those of you who are in the US, Rev AI can actually be made HIPAA compliant, which means that you do not send the data anywhere, your sensitive data, but it actually conforms to those guidelines. And then there's Whisper. Now, Whisper is an open access tool. I will talk a little bit about that later, that actually can handle lots and lots of different languages, but it's not that straightforward to use, but it's a very promising one because it's free and it's doing a pretty good job. You can also dictate a child sample, of course, this is just one example, hey, and no invested interest in any of those, which then is a lot more secure, of course, and a lot more confidential. You can send your transcript to SALT, but that will cost you about, I've heard, between $30 to $50 per transcript. Or you can automatically transcribe it using the freely available TalkBank batch line. So you can download that straight from GitHub. Again, if you're interested in that, or in I've created sort of a cheat sheet, let me know, and I'm happy to make that available. And you can do that either online, so that will send the data to Rev AI, and then you have to be careful with confidentiality, or locally on your own computer, which makes it completely safe to use. So the pitfalls: it may not be compliant with sort of, and have client confidentiality. Now, I know that somebody texted me last night, and they are developing something that's called SpeechSense. It's in a beta version still, but it's only for US citizens at the moment. So that doesn't help us in other countries. As I said, Microsoft, it doesn't identify mazes and fillers and often corrects the grammar. It doesn't work that well for transcripts that are difficult to understand. So if your audio quality is bad, or the child's intelligibility is low, or the child says a lot of things that the ASR model can't predict, you get hallucinations. And we're finding that we've collected quite a few samples, personal narrative samples from autistic children, and we're finding that the software actually really needs to do a better job because it doesn't always reflect what the child actually said. Now, a safe approach then at the moment that I'm using is I do use Batchline. I use it locally with Whisper AI on my own computer, and you can freely download that from GitHub. As I said, I'm happy to make a cheat sheet available. You may need some help, not sure how computer literate you are. And you then create a chat file. So I'll talk about chats in a minute, because that goes with Clan, which is freely available from the Child's or the TalkBank website. So you then have two options. You can use Clan, so that's from Childers, from TalkBank, to tidy up the transcript and use Clan to analyze it. Or you can convert that chat file into a more SALT-friendly file, as in a text file. And that little converter there will be freely available until about the 10th of February. And at that stage, we'll have to pay for it. So we're really looking forward. And I'm saying it's my daughter who's on maternity leave and is a Python guru, to see what you think of that particular tool, if this is the way you want to go, for free. Okay, So from audio to transcript then, step one would be, if you wanted to use sort of my way of doing it at the moment, is you put it into batcher line, and this is the kind of transcript that you get on the left-hand side. So you can see PAR0 is the speaker identification. Then there are lots of other little codes that you can safely ignore. But if you align it with your audio file in Clan, and that's a pretty cool feature, you can actually correct the transcript while you're going through the audio file, and the program will stop automatically. Or what you can do is you can use that chat to text that I've just shown you the link for. That tidies up the speaker identification for you, so puts it into a C and an E for child and examiner. It will add the prompts if you're using global tales. So those are the personal narratives that we often collect by adding little plus lines where the next topic is. It will add timelines of where it stopped and started, and it will tidy up your mazes. And then if you look on the right-hand side, it'll look something like this. It still needs some tidying up, but it really, really speeds up the process. Absolutely. Okay, so that's where I want to leave it for now. I'm happy, as I said, to do further webinars or cheat sheets if you're interested in that. But let's move on to analysis tools or computer programs. So there are several options. I'm sure there are more, but I'm going to point out 4 of them: Salt, Clan, Sugar, and Mimo, that you may not have heard of. So for those of you who don't know Salt, it's been around for a while. I've known these people since the late 90s. It's a software program. It really standardizes the process of eliciting, transcribing, and analyzing your language samples. And then it includes like an editor. You can get standard reports, quick snapshots, and reference databases for comparisons with typical peers. So I'm just going to use it typical, but these are peers that have no difficulties at school, who have no history of speech or language difficulties, and no other known diagnoses. So at the moment, it's available in English, Spanish, and Turkish, but it can handle left to right languages for simple analyses. So, for example, we put in a lot of the Croatian samples, and it will come up with things like your mean length of utterance and the number of utterances, moving average number of different words. So then if we look at Salt, first of all, I personally think the beauty of Salt is it's got all these built-in reference databases. So that's very much like if you have the self, for example, or TILs. What you do is you want to compare it to some norms. I wouldn't call it norms. We're going to call it benchmarks. Like, what do we expect children to do, or what language skills to show if we ask them to, for example, explain the rules of a game or retell a particular story. And what you can see is that there are quite a few databases of English fluent speakers, and you can see the age ranges on the left-hand side. And then quite a few colleagues, they call them, have contributed their databases. So the Test of Narrative Language, both versions, by Ron Gillum and colleagues. We've got a New Zealand Australia database that I've been helping with 4 to 9 years of age. And then the NE is one that was by Phyllis Schneider, ages 4 to 10 in Canada. Now, we're in the process of including Liz Hill's adolescent language samples. And you may know her paper, and the reference is on the last slide. And she's got expository, persuasion, recount, and narrative samples of about 120 adolescents, ages 12 to 15. So that's exciting. But the rough benchmarks are already available in a paper, so you can just access those. So let's compare Salt then to Chat and Clan. So this is the link where you can download Clan for free. It will compute language sample analysis measures across 49 languages. So that is very exciting. It will require some coding for repetitions, fillers, intelligible segments, abandoned utterances, and errors. But ASR is getting very good at this. They've got Bachelor, as I've just pointed out, that will do a lot of the hard work for you. And it can automatically check and code morphology in many languages once you've got it into that CLAN program. You just run another little program on it. It takes a little while to get your head around it. I'm getting there. As I said before, you can link your audio or video to the transcripts, which is amazing. And then there are some published measures available. Mean length of utterance, VOC-D, which is a semantic measure that is much more sensitive to age and development than, for example, the rough number of different words, IP sync, and developmental sentence scoring. So they've then created a tiny little program called KidEval, and you can use that again for free. And then those measures you can compare to their samples that are integrated in the child's databases, but they're really all below 6 years of age for now. So if we compare SALT then to Chat and CLAN, then one is that it's really that we shouldn't compare anything other than adult child play with a child under the age of 6. So I think that is probably the main limitation of using CLAN. So what it does do, it will give you an amazing analysis once you get your head around it. But if you wanted to compare it to peers or local benchmarks, there are some restrictions there. You can calculate Brown's morphemes, and you can use eval, so not KidEval, but eval, to look at adult language ability. And they also have a really cool program that looks at fluency. So let's compare SALT to Sugar. So I don't know if you've heard of Sugar. It is a protocol, and it uses Microsoft Word. So very sort of, in a way, low tech and easy to access. There's very minimal coding required. You do still need to identify morphemes, but I'm really hoping that most of us, if we're all speech pathologists, we should know how to do that. And then the transcribers actually don't look at filler words, repetitions, or reformulations, which means that you can't look at the child's sort of fluency, verbal fluency. But again, you may not be interested in that. There are no procedures for error coding, so let's hope that that may come at some stage. They have comparison data available for 50 utterance conversation samples at the moment, between 3 and 7. But of course, this is my but. We do know that conversation samples may not be the best context for assessing syntactic complexity, right? So conversation samples are really good for interaction and a child's general language skills, but we do know that narrative, expository, and persuasion are much more linguistically dense samples. So you just need to keep that in mind. Okay, so then let's have a quick look at MIMO. That's quite new. So MIMO is actually quite a well-known acronym. It's called Minimal Input, Maximal Output. So that sounds amazing. Their grammar is available for 65 mainly European languages. This is straight from their website, and you see the link there. I suppose you could save chat files to text files and upload directly, but yeah, it will require a slightly different way of uploading it. And I'll show you one example in a minute. There's a really cool color coding of lexical and syntactic classes. And I'm thinking it may help you sort of identify those kind of semantic and grammatical classes quite easily. I haven't checked for accuracy yet. And then you can compare to norms taken from Childers. So remember, that's TalkBank, and that's what CLAN can do as well. And like mean length of utterance in morphemes, the density of the types of words, and TTR. Now, we do not want to use TTR, which is type token ratio. So I'll come back to that a bit later. That is just not a measure that will tell us anything relevant to a child's ability to use words. semantics. So a big cross there. So this is an example of a MeMo output. So it's well worth having a little play with it. What I've done is I've put a little transcript in that we will look at later using SALT. And as you can see, the child only had 7 utterances. So child is just to indicate to speaker. And then interesting, Anna was going out of the door. It split Anna into a noun and a verb. So I'm not quite sure how that happened. But it will give you the number of words, the number of morphemes, number of clauses, and then there's quite a bit more information that you can get out of it. So it looks really promising to me, especially if you want to have a look at the child's output. Although this information can easily be obtained from CLAN, it just doesn't look as nice, my interpretation. So how long does it take? So there's been a nice paper published in 2019. They looked at 50 utterances and they said SALT would take about 5 to 15 minutes, sugar only 2 to 4 minutes, and CLAN would take 5 to 11 minutes. And all I've done on this slide is just giving you some examples of what a coded sample would look like in these 3 different programs. And of course, you've just seen what the MeMo one looks like as well. So it all depends on your language sample analysis questions, right? The types of measures you're interested in. We know that MLU is, it loses sensitivity to age or development after the age of 5 or 6, but it's a sensitive indicator to sort of significant language difficulties or language disorders. The number of different words or moving average number of different words if we're interested in semantics. Grammatical errors, of course, is a sensitive indicator to language impairment. Rate, verbal fluency. Do we want to look at turn taking? Do we want to look at narrative quality? So really depending on what is the information you want to get out of your analysis. And the depth of your planned analysis. You know, how much information do you need to set goals that can be individualized to the child, that will be useful to the child's daily functioning? The age, of course, of your client. How intelligible is your client? If the child's really difficult to understand, then it's going to be hard to transcribe and it's going to be really hard to do a structured systematic analysis. Depends on the discourse context that's most relevant to the child that you're seeing, whether it's conversation, narrative, or persuasion. Depends on the child's year of schooling as well. And then whether you want to just describe the child's language performance, perhaps for measuring progress, or whether you want to compare that to benchmarks. So if you then look at a comparison of the database features, and again, this is from that tutorial published in 2019, then you can see that the age ranges that were included at that moment, the type of sample that is included as a benchmark or reference database, the languages, and then the cost. And you can see that the analysis features then the types of measures that you can get from CLAN, SALT, and sugar. You can sort of have a bit of a comparison, and that might help you decide which one you want to use. Now, of course, there is a cost to SALT, which is a once-off cost, but you can download a free trial version. Okay, so worth noting then, this is from John Miller, that really no 2 students with language disorders, as he called it, are alike, right? Some kids may have what we might call a general developmental delay, where we want to look at, okay, is everything sort of a little bit lower compared to peers who attend the same class or the same year of schooling? Does the child have word finding or utterance formulation problems? Are there difficulties at that discourse level? Difficulties maintaining topic, or the child doesn't respond to examiner questions? What about the speaking rate? what about the percentage of errors and omissions? So again, we do need to keep in mind, if we have a child who we suspect may have a language disorder, perhaps a developmental language disorder, then of course we do want to align our analysis with the hypothesized difficulties a child may show at word, sentence, and discourse level. And John Miller says language sample analysis, when done properly, is a standardized assessment. And we could probably discuss that and spend a bit of time on that. So then, if we had to choose the elicitation context, because we want to choose wisely, right? We don't have a lot of time. As I said before, it really depends on the child's intelligibility. It has to be over 70 or 80%. And the child's mean length of utterance. If the child speaks in very short sentences, you can do online transcription of what the child is saying. I don't think you need to go through, transcribing 50 utterances or listening to an audio file to transcribe 50 utterances and so on. The reason for eliciting sample, the child's context, what does the child do on a daily basis? What does the child want to work on? So what are the child's and family's goals? Your plan's analysis, and then the availability of norms or benchmarks. So a rough guide, this is from a different paper in 2020, and I'm just going to add a couple here, is that really if we're looking at the preschool and early childhood, it could be in a play type situation. We do know that we can have children have a conversation with children, and we know there's been quite a bit of research that that's quite an efficient way of getting quite a few utterances from the child for a detailed analysis. And we can look at story retell or generation. Expository we've done for children from about 6 or 7 years of age. That's why I've put in the orange shape. And then persuasive skills, again, definitely from the elementary years. And especially if you're in Australia, persuasion is one of those dreaded goals of national sort of assessments that children work on from sometimes year 2 of schooling. So my suggestion, and you can probably guess this, check why you want to do it. Do you have access to SALT? Do you want to compare to benchmarks, or is it not important? And if so, check out the built reference databases, as you cannot compare apples to pears. So what a child does when you just ask a child to describe a picture, for example, you cannot compare that to benchmarks that have been published where a child is asked to explain the rules of a game, or where the child is asked to retell a story. So you really, if you want to compare to benchmarks, you have to use the same type of protocol, if not exactly the same protocol. And I've published quite a few articles in that space. So I'm going to now give you a little case study, and his name is not his real name, Hugo, not his real photo either, but it's quite cute. He's 5 years, 10 months, and he has a history of speech language difficulties. This was a real case example, actually. The child has a history of speech language pathology intervention. Now, you elicit a language sample as part of your 6-monthly intervention review process. And you can see the SELF, so that's the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals preschool results on the right-hand side. So you can see here that word structure, which is an expressive test, is a standard score of 6. So below 1 standard deviation, remember between 7 and 13, or a scaled score of 6. Expressive vocabulary, as you can see here, would be within expectations compared to same age peers. Recalling sentences, again, showing difficulties there. And then the sum of expressive language scores is just below 1 standard deviation, considering 1 standard deviation is between 85 and 115. Basic concepts, so we're getting into the receptive language skills, a standard score of 11. So he did well, as expected. Concepts and following directions was really tricky with a scaled score of 5. Sentence structure, so that's understanding basic grammatical structures in a sentence within sort of age expectations. And the sum of receptive language scores were within age expectations overall. If we use 1 standard deviation as the cutoff. And again, you may or may not agree with that. So Hugo is in prep, which is the first year of schooling here in Queensland, and the teacher has concerns about his participation in the classroom. So we need to decide the discourse context that is age appropriate and relevant to the curriculum. So in this case, a story retell and comprehension was considered an appropriate discourse context because of the strong links between narrative retell and comprehension and academic performance, especially reading comprehension. And then we wanted to compare that to benchmarks because his self-scores, if I may put it that way, don't look that bad, right? So we really want to see what does he do in a more functional context. So our hypotheses or questions would then be, does he have difficulties with syntax or morphology in spoken discourse? What is his ability to tell a coherent story? So that's the quality of the story. And does he have difficulties in story comprehension, considering he had some difficulties with concepts or following directions? So the measures we might be particularly interested in would be still mean length of utterance, just as an indicator of grammatical complexity, and then his accuracy and errors. And we want to look at the quality of his narrative, and we want to look at his comprehension. So then if we look at the SALT built-in reference databases, we have some choice if we look at his age. And then in this case, of course, but I mean, that's just my example, we decided to use a New Zealand Australia database because we do have those benchmarks. If I hadn't had them, I could have compared them, for example, to the samples from the test of narrative language, right? We do that all the time when we use the test of narrative language to come up with our standard scores, for example. So let's have a look at the next slide. So in this case, for Australia and New Zealand, you can use either Anna Gets Lost, ages 4 to 7.5, or the bus story, which we used with kids in Australia in prep, grade 1 and grade 2. Now in SALT, and I'm just going to give you a few little snapshots, but it will tell you in the database snapshot how these samples were elicited. So you can try and adhere to exactly the same guidelines. So when we follow the guidelines, which is, you know, he listened to it once, then he answered some questions, and he listened to it again, and he retold it. This is the sample we got. So this is a very rough, quick transcription, only 7 utterances. So as we can see, Hugo obtained a story comprehension score of only 1. So we asked him 8 questions, including, you know, who's the story about? Why did she stay at home? Again, you can get access to the full story. I will give you the link and the comprehension questions, but he only scored 1. He said correctly, who's the story about? And then he scored 16 on the oral narrative quality rubric. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But what do we do after this step? Right? What does it look like in SALT? So I'm just going to play this and I'll just guide you through it. It's only 2 minutes. So what you do is you basically start a new transcript and then you enter some details. It's up to you how much, 5 years, 10 months, examiner name. It's a narrative, it's AGL for Anna Gets Lost. And then you click OK. And this is what you get. And then what I did is I just copied and pasted the transcript from Word, and now SALT will help you to identify the roots, and then you need to decide whether that is a bound morpheme or not. So Anna was going out of the door. It's a past, it's an ing, progressive ing, past tense, and it will guide you through it. And sometimes, of course, like shops, we don't see that as a plural because you just go to the shops. It's not you go to one shop. In this case, we accepted that as one word. So then what you do is you can check for entry errors in SALT and you can run analyze. So that is a very fast one. But as I said, you'll get the recording so you could watch it again. Then we're going to code for grammatical errors. So very, very simply, what we want to do is look at it utterance by utterance, and then decide, is that utterance grammatically accurate or not? So again, it depends on how much detail you want to put in. But if you saw this as a little screener, a first look at the child's performance, you can do it by sentence. So Anna was going out of the door, an error at utterance level, and him was crying. That's an error at word level. Actually, I missed he looked into the shops. It's a pronoun error. The police pat on his back, error at the utterance level, and take her home, and him got lost. So you can see that there's an error in almost every utterance. We then run analyze, and you can see it's got 7 utterances, 45 words, 6.43 in words, 686 in morphemes, and so on. So these measures are quite similar to the ones you just saw in MIMO, but what it adds here is percentage of utterances with errors, because we've just coded that, and you can see 85.7% of the utterances had an error in them. So that is a very fast overview. What's next? So what we want to do then is we want to insert the oral narrative comprehension and oral narrative quality templates. And we want to score the little story for oral narrative quality. Now, you're probably used to that anyway. If we score examples of stories in it's escaped me. What's included in Story Champs, for example, again, you would need to score it, and you may have a template for that, and you score it for inclusion of elements for it. So what we do here is we add a template, and you just go to edit, insert a template, and you can do oral narrative quality. All it does is it will remind you what elements to score. So introduction, theme, characters, conflict, coherence, resolution, conclusion, and oral narrative comprehension. You can just put your 1, because remember, Hugo only scored 1 question correct. So the way we code the sample for quality is we use, as I said before, a simple rubric. Again, that's freely available, and where we look at, does the child include all the introduction elements? What about the theme of getting lost, the main character? And there is like a sliding scale where a 1 is where the child is not doing it or it's emerging. A 3 is that it's or immature. 3 is it's emerging, and a 5 is that it's proficient. So this is Hugo's score, an introduction of 1, then 3, 3, 1, 1, 1, 3, 3. So you can see that he scored immature on or absent on some of these, and then on others he had an emerging score. And that would give us a total score. So remember our questions. They were, we wanted to know about the child's MLU. We wanted to know about the child's grammatical accuracy. And we wanted to get a sense of story comprehension and story quality compared to others the same age or same year of schooling. So let's see what we get here. So we go to the database. We select the database, and in this instance, it's already selected AGL for us because that's what we indicated. You can decide to compare to just the Australian samples or the New Zealand samples. In this case, we will just select on age. We've got 110 samples, and then we can say, okay, how many samples in total we want to compare to, and we're choosing 97. What we want to do then is we say, okay, let's have a look at the quick look report. And we're going to look at the whole transcript like we normally would when we look at a story retell sample. So what I'm going to do now is I'll go to the next slide, and I'll explain that one in a little bit more detail. So the quick look, what it does, and we may want to update some of these words here, but if we look at the different language measures and we look at strengths and challenges or weaknesses and within normal limits or age expectations, This is a report for you, right? Not for the parent, to give you a quick overview of how the child performs. And what you can see straight away is if we look at the macrostructure analysis, the child's oral narrative quality and oral narrative comprehension are actually a particular challenge for Hugo. But if we look at some of the syntax and morphology, his MLU in words was within age expectations. Mean verbs per utterance was okay, but he had fewer utterances with verbs than other children. His semantics, we use a moving average number of different words, which uses different windows. But again, it was within age expectations. And verbal facility, May's words with a strength. He didn't use many repetitions and reformulations. Words per minute, he was a little bit slower than other children in retelling his story. But we're interested in the percentage of errors, and we can see that was definitely higher than we would expect from other children aged between 5'4" and 6'4". So then, not to overwhelm you too much, but this would, a standard measures report would look like this, and then highlighted in yellow. So those are the asterisked measures. You can see that compared to his peers, fewer utterances, lower oral narrative quality, and the other measures that I've just pointed out to you, but relative strengths in mean length of utterance, number of different words, amazing behavior. And the database at the top, we've compared that to 110 or 97 database samples, using exactly the same task. You can create a performance report. I won't read this out. This is a standard report that we've actually inserted. You can just edit that in Word, but it does the bulk of the work for you. And the nice thing is that it will give you some examples of what the child actually did. And we all know that it's really important to have those kind of examples in your report, so it makes sense to the parents, much more so than strengths and challenges or standard scores. So you may think, I can transcribe and analyze 7 utterances by hand. You can. It's a very short sample, right? So I see this as the sort of the first cut, just to look at some red flags in a context that's really relevant to the child's functioning at school. And we would need 50 utterances for more detailed linguistic analysis if you really wanted to look at developmental sentence scoring, or you wanted to really look at absence and presence of bound morphemes. So you need the 50 utterances, but it may depend on the findings from this short sample. With Hugo, we did elicit another sample, and we elicited personal narratives, and we then had 42 utterances that were complete and intelligible. And we could also compare that to a database that we have, or benchmarks that we have integrated into SALT. So, future plans. I personally think benchmark or reference data sets are super useful. Now, it's been very exciting to see that Suze Leitao and her colleagues have just published some local benchmarks on Peter and the Cat. So you may be using that particular tool, which is it's a little narrative task of a cat that's up in a tree, and they're benchmarked from 7 to 11. So again, what you can do is, once you've got your simple measures, you can compare that to the benchmarks that she's just published in IJSLP. I do feel that if we integrate them into SALT, or we can actually even create a little database locally that you can then use for comparisons, it just makes it easier and quicker. So assistance with creating reference data sets would be super, super helpful. We're always looking for volunteers. And as I said, we then go through the whole process of making sure that those samples are reliable. Now, at the moment, we are eliciting global tales, which are personal narratives based on emotional terms, like tell me a story about a time you were happy or excited. We're doing that with adults. So we're creating some adult benchmarks to see how does it work from, children into adulthood and old age. I'm also creating some really short bite-sized videos to cover the very basics, like communication units or coding for bound morphemes, or you can give me any suggestions you want, right? Because sometimes there are little things that you think, oh, I'm not quite sure how to do that. Communication units are important because that will impact the child's length of the utterance. And even Bachelline or Clan, if you look at it, sometimes it just puts all the child's utterances on one line, which really inflates the child's MLU. And it's not always good at marking grammatical errors either. So think about what else can I do to make language sampling and analysis more doable for you. So you will receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides. I will upload this to, like it's an e-learning page on my site. And then, you know, do you have any questions or suggestions for future webinars or mini module topics? I'd love to hear from you. I've been posting everything on Instagram. That seems to work quite well. So you could follow me there. And yeah, I'd love to have some. We've done well. I'd love to have some questions or comments. I might just open that up. I'll stop the recording if that's easier, and then I'll stop the sharing as well. And if you have a busy life to get on with, that's quite all right as well.